My name is Logan Hantley, and I've spent my career tearing apart marriages for a living. As a divorce attorney, I've seen every kind of betrayal. Hidden bank accounts, secret affairs, manipulations so precise they could be considered an art form. I thought I was immune to it. I thought I could recognize a lie before it ever reached the surface. But I was wrong. For years, I built a life with a woman I believed was my partner, someone who stood beside me as I fought for others in court. I built a firm with a man I called my best friend, someone I trusted more than anyone else. And then, one day I found out the truth. My wife and my best friend had been planning my downfall behind my back, conspiring to take everything, my money, my firm, my reputation. They thought they had the perfect plan, that I would never see it coming. But what they didn't realize was that I don't just know how to survive betrayal. I know how to dismantle it from the inside out. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. I always thought I had seen it all. As a divorce attorney, I had spent years watching marriages crumble like sandcastles under a rising tide. I had seen the worst in people. Hidden bank accounts, secret affairs, manipulations so twisted they made my stomach turn. But there was always a certain detachment, a professional wall that separated me from the chaos. I was the man people hired to win their battles, to make sure they walked away with everything they deserved. The irony was that while I was saving my clients, I never saw the war brewing in my own home. Victoria and I had been married for 10 years. She was beautiful, polished, the perfect socialite. She knew how to work a room, charm the right people, and keep up appearances. It was one of the things I admired about her in the beginning. To the world, we were the power couple. Successful, respected, untouchable. But the cracks had been forming for a long time, and I had been too blind or too arrogant to see them. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs. The late nights, the whispered phone calls, the sudden interest in networking events that never seemed to have an actual purpose. The distance between us that had slowly turned into a chasm. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a single document that my entire world shifted. A divorce petition, neatly typed, sitting on her desk as if it were just another routine contract. I stared at it, reading the words over and over, my pulse hammering in my ears. She had already drafted it. She had planned everything. There was a section accusing me of financial misconduct, hidden assets, tax fraud, accusations so precise, so damning, that they could ruin me if taken to court. And at the bottom, the name of her attorney. Benjamin Cole, my best friend, my business partner. I felt a cold numbness settle in my chest. This wasn't just a betrayal, this was a coup. They had been planning it behind my back, working together to take everything from me. My firm, my reputation, my financial stability. If she filed first with those accusations, the burden of proof would fall on me. I had spent my career protecting people from this exact kind of destruction, yet here I was, standing on the edge of my own downfall. I forced myself to think logically. Reacting now would be a mistake. If I confronted Victoria, she would just accelerate the plan. If I went after Ben, I would be playing into their hands. No. I needed to be smart. I needed to play the game the way I had taught my clients to play it. I needed to let them believe they had already won. That night I went home as if nothing had changed. Victoria greeted me with the same polite indifference she had mastered over the years, a glass of wine in her hand, her makeup flawless, her smile empty. I kissed her on the cheek and poured myself a drink. We talked about her fundraiser, the new partnerships she was securing for her charity work. She mentioned Ben in passing, casual as ever, as if she wasn't conspiring with him to destroy me. I played my part perfectly, nodding at the right moments, pretending to be the same oblivious husband she thought I was. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. She had a schedule, a pattern. Mondays and Wednesdays were meetings with potential donors. Fridays were personal wellness days, which, according to her, meant spa treatments and self-care. But I knew better now. She was slipping away for hours at a time, and I had no doubt that Ben was part of it. I didn't need to catch them in the act to know the truth. The real evidence was in the paper trail, and that was where I would start. I met with a private investigator the next morning, a former federal agent, the kind of man who could uncover every dirty little secret buried beneath the surface. I gave him Victoria's schedule, her frequent locations, the people she interacted with. I needed proof, but more than that, I needed leverage. The kind of leverage that would turn their game against them. While he got to work, I started securing my own assets. Closing certain accounts, shifting funds, making sure that when the time came, they wouldn't be able to touch a cent of what I had built. The hardest part was acting normal, sitting across from Ben in our office, pretending nothing had changed. He was good at deception, I would give him that. He still laughed at my jokes, still talked about upcoming cases, still gave me the same easy smile he had for years. But I saw it now, the way he avoided eye contact when he spoke about long-term plans, the way he subtly steered conversations toward financial restructuring, trying to feel out what I was willing to protect in case of a legal dispute. He thought he was playing me. He had no idea the game had already shifted. I let Victoria believe she was winning, let her think she was ahead. She started to relax, to drop her guard. She made small mistakes, leaving her laptop open on the kitchen counter, answering texts a little too quickly, slipping up in her explanations about where she had been. It was almost insulting how little she thought of me, how easily she assumed I would never catch on. I smiled through it all, because the truth was, I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to burn everything they had built together to the ground, and they would never see it coming. I had always believed that knowing the truth would make betrayal easier to stomach, that once the illusion was shattered, once the lies were laid bare, it would be simple to detach and move forward like I had seen my clients do time and time again. But I had underestimated just how deeply this cut. Every morning I woke up next to the woman who had already planned my downfall. Every day I walked into the office and shook hands with the man who was waiting to bury me. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the slow, creeping violation of knowing that the people closest to me had been studying me like prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. But they had miscalculated. They thought they were hunting me, when in reality, I was already setting the trap for them. I started moving pieces quietly. I had already secured my financial assets, making sure that any accounts Victoria thought she could access had either been emptied or legally transferred beyond her reach. She would still see the numbers on paper, but by the time she tried to make a withdrawal, they would be nothing more than ghosts in the system. I also began redirecting certain client accounts in the firm, ensuring that the most valuable assets weren't just under my name, but locked behind legal clauses that would make it impossible for Ben to claim them. If he thought he could walk into my office one day and declare himself the new king, he was going to be in for a rude awakening. The private investigator I hired was thorough. He sent me daily updates, photographs of Victoria meeting Ben in dimly lit lounges, texts that had been pulled from burner phones, emails carefully worded to avoid direct implication but obvious in their intent. The affair wasn't just physical, it was strategic. They had been siphoning money, planting the groundwork to paint me as financially reckless, waiting for the perfect moment to drop the hammer. But their biggest mistake wasn't the betrayal itself, it was underestimating the kind of man they were dealing with. I watched them as if I were a bystander in my own life. Victoria would come home late, claiming exhaustion, her perfume too strong as if to mask something else. She still played the role of the perfect wife, asking about my day, pretending to care, but I could see the rehearsed indifference in her eyes. She was already gone in her mind, already living in the version of the future where I was nothing more than an afterthought. I let her think I was distracted, absorbed in work, too oblivious to notice the details. And I let Ben think I was falling for his sudden concerns about the firm. He had started planting doubts, little seeds of fear meant to steer me toward certain decisions. You know, if anything ever happens between you and Victoria, the firm could be at risk legally, he said casually over drinks one night. It might be smart to start separating assets now, just to protect yourself. He even had the audacity to act as though he was looking out for me, as if he wasn't the one engineering my destruction behind the scenes. I played along. I let him think I was considering it. I told him he was probably right, that maybe it was time to move things around just in case. He took the bait eagerly, offering to set up some temporary holding accounts to keep things clean. I nodded, smiled, and told him I'd think about it. Meanwhile, I had already hired my own forensic accountant to track every dollar he had been funneling out of the firm. Every falsified document, every off-the-book transaction, every single cent he thought had gone unnoticed, I had it all. The beauty of watching them dig their own graves was that they didn't even realize they were holding the shovel. The deeper they went, the more reckless they became. Victoria was growing bolder. She started letting her guard down, slipping up in small but meaningful ways. She left her phone on the nightstand one evening while she showered, a rare mistake, and I couldn't resist. I didn't need to read every message, just a few were enough. Ben's name appeared more times than I cared to count. I hate pretending with him. Soon, he's so blind it's almost sad. Just a little longer and it's done. I locked the screen, placed the phone exactly as it had been, and walked downstairs to pour myself a drink. I let the bitterness sit on my tongue, let the weight of their words sink in. I had spent my entire career dismantling lies, exposing betrayals, making sure my clients walked away with everything they deserved. And now, it was my turn. They thought I was the fool. But they had no idea what was coming. The more I observed, the clearer their arrogance became. Victoria no longer tried to be discreet. She would come home late, sometimes with the faintest hint of perfume that wasn't hers, other times with a look of satisfaction she didn't even bother to hide. She assumed I was too preoccupied to notice, too comfortable in my own world to suspect anything. Ben was the same, smug, calculated, slipping little comments into conversations that might have rattled me if I didn't already know his game. They were confident that I was still blind, that the pieces they had been moving into place for months would trap me when the time came. But what they didn't realize was that I had already started dismantling their entire plan right under their noses. Victoria had always been meticulous when it came to finances, always aware of where every dollar went. That's why, when she started making small, untraceable withdrawals, I knew it wasn't just casual spending. She was stockpiling cash, likely setting up reserves for the moment she walked away. It wasn't the withdrawals themselves that gave her away. It was the pattern. The amounts were always just under the bank's reporting threshold, spread out across different accounts, small enough that she assumed they wouldn't raise suspicion. She was careful, I would give her that, but not careful enough. My forensic accountant had already flagged the transactions, tracking where the money was moving and who else had access to the accounts she had been shifting funds into, and unsurprisingly, Ben's name was all over them. At the firm, Ben had started making power moves of his own. It started subtly. A few private meetings, changes to client portfolios that I wasn't made aware of until after they happened, discussions about shifting legal responsibilities that were framed as precautionary measures. Then came the real test. One afternoon, he pulled me into a meeting under the pretense of discussing a high-profile client. But the real topic wasn't business, it was my marriage. "Look, Logan," he started, leaning back in his chair with an air of forced concern. "I know things between you and Victoria haven't been great lately. You don't have to say anything, but I can see it. If you ever need to talk..." I let him talk, let him think he was easing me into a false sense of security. "I appreciate that," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It's been a rough few months, I won't lie." He nodded, like he understood, like he wasn't the very person orchestrating my downfall. "I just want you to know that, no matter what happens, the firm is secure. We've built something incredible here. You've always been the backbone of this place, and I don't want anything to jeopardize that. A divorce can get ugly, especially with assets involved, and I'd hate to see you lose something you worked so hard for." It was a test, a calculated push to see if I would flinch, if I would admit that I had any doubts, if I was weak enough to be led toward the conclusions he wanted me to draw. But I didn't flinch. I nodded slowly, playing my part. "I've been thinking about that too," I admitted, watching his reaction closely. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to start making some adjustments, just in case." That was all he needed to hear. His expression didn't change, but I could see the slight shift in his posture, the way he relaxed just a little. He thought he had me. "I can start drafting some preliminary paperwork," he offered. "Just some protective measures. We'll keep it low-key, nothing official yet." I agreed. Let him believe I was open to his suggestions. But what he didn't know was that I had already drafted my own set of documents. Ones that would strip him of everything he was trying to steal. Meanwhile, the private investigator I had hired was relentless. The evidence against Victoria and Ben kept piling up. Photos, emails, text messages, meetings at hotels, financial records linking them to shared offshore accounts, contracts they had drawn up in secret. But the final blow came when my investigator handed me a flash drive one evening with a single recording. "Thought you'd want to hear this for yourself," he said, his expression unreadable. I waited until I was alone in my home office to play it. The audio was clear, crisp, every word unmistakable. It was a phone conversation between Victoria and a friend of hers, one she trusted enough to confide in. She was laughing, her voice dripping with amusement. "He has no idea," she said, sounding almost giddy. "It's honestly pathetic. I thought he'd be smarter than this, but he hasn't questioned a thing. Ben keeps telling me to be patient, but I just want it over with already. I'm tired of pretending." The friend must have asked her something because she continued with a chuckle. "Of course, I'll get everything. The house, the money, my shares of the firm. Logan will be lucky if he walks away with his name still intact. But he won't fight. He's too proud. That's the best part. He'll just let it happen." I let the recording play out, listening to every damning word, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. It should have made me angry, should have sent me into a spiral of rage and resentment, but all I felt was cold certainty. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was calculated annihilation. And they thought I was going to sit back and let it happen. I sent the recording to my lawyer that night, along with everything else I had collected. The affair, the financial fraud, the conspiracy to strip me of my assets. It was all meticulously documented, undeniable. My lawyer didn't even hesitate. "We file first," he said, his voice firm, "before she makes a move. By the time she even thinks about serving you with divorce papers, she'll already be losing." I stared at my phone for a long time after we ended the call. Upstairs, Victoria was asleep, unaware that the world she had built was already beginning to crumble. Ben was probably feeling victorious, thinking he had successfully manipulated me into making decisions that would ultimately benefit him. They were both so confident, so convinced of their own superiority. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't their game anymore. I wasn't the one trapped in their scheme. They were the ones walking straight into mine. The day Victoria saw it would mark the beginning of my downfall was, in reality, the day everything unraveled for her and Ben. She had been preparing for this moment for months, perhaps even years, carefully orchestrating every step. I had no doubt she imagined herself walking away victorious, taking everything while I stood there blindsided, helpless against her betrayal. The beauty of it was that she had no idea I had been steps ahead of her all along. She chose a Friday afternoon to make her move. A calculated decision. End of the work week, giving me little time to react before the courts closed for the weekend. I had to give her credit for thinking strategically. She walked into my office, dressed impeccably as always, her expression carefully measured, a stack of documents in her hands. She placed them neatly on my desk, took a seat across from me, and sighed as if this was difficult for her. "Logan," she started, voice laced with false sympathy, "this isn't easy, but it's for the best. I think we both know things haven't been working for a long time." I looked at her, keeping my expression neutral, my body relaxed. I could see she was expecting a reaction. Anger, denial, desperation. Instead, I reached for the papers without a word and flipped through them slowly, taking my time. It was all there. Divorce petition, financial disclosures, the allegations of misconduct, a request for full ownership of the house, spousal support, and a significant percentage of my firm. She was gutting me, just like she had planned. I closed the folder and set it aside, meeting her gaze. "You've put a lot of thought into this," I said calmly. She hesitated, as if my lack of emotion threw her off. "I just want to do this as amicably as possible," she replied, her tone softer now, a performance for the record. "I don't want to drag this out, Logan. If you agree to the terms, we can get through this without any unnecessary complications." It took everything in me not to smile. She truly believed she had control over the situation. She thought she was dictating the terms. She had no idea what was about to hit her. I leaned back in my chair, clasping my hands together. That's considerate of you, Victoria, I said evenly. I assume Ben helped you draft these? For the first time, I saw something flicker in her expression. Surprise, quickly masked by indifference. I spoke to my attorney, she answered carefully, avoiding my question. I nodded, pretending to accept the lie. Good. I'd hate to think you were making legal moves without proper guidance. But before I sign anything, there's something you should know. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out my own set of documents, and placed them directly on top of hers. You've been busy, Victoria. So have I. She frowned, clearly not expecting this. Slowly, she reached for the papers, flipping through them as confusion turned to realization, and realization turned to panic. I had filed first. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial fraud, infidelity, conspiracy to commit asset theft. The forensic reports, the bank statements, the surveillance photos, the text messages. It was all there, laid out in black and white. Her breath hitched. "What is this?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "It's your future," I said simply. "Or rather, what's left of it." She flipped another page, her hands shaking slightly. She saw the section detailing how her fraudulent financial activity had been reported to federal authorities, the section confirming that, due to her misconduct, she would walk away with nothing. No house, no money, no stake in my firm. She looked up at me, her mask finally cracking. You can't do this." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Why not?" She swallowed hard. We can work something out. This doesn't have to be ugly, Logan. I was upset. I made mistakes, but we don't have to destroy each other." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Oh, Victoria, you were never going to destroy me, but I will enjoy watching you destroy yourself." Before she could respond, my office door opened. Ben stepped in, a smug grin on his face, completely unaware of what he was walking into. "Hey, Logan," he said casually, as if he hadn't been conspiring against me. His gaze flicked to Victoria, noting her pale expression, the tension in the room. His smile faltered. "What's going on?" I leaned back in my chair, feeling nothing but satisfaction. We were just discussing the divorce and the legal repercussions of fraud. Ben's face darkened. "What the hell are you talking about?" I gestured toward the papers in Victoria's hands. "You should take a look. Your name comes up quite a bit." I watched as he took the folder from her, his eyes scanning the pages. The color drained from his face as he realized what he was reading. The financial records tying him directly to embezzlement. The paper trail exposing how he had been siphoning money through shell accounts. The evidence proving his involvement in orchestrating my supposed downfall. He looked up at me, panic replacing arrogance. "Logan, this isn't what it looks like." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Because it looks like you and Victoria conspired to strip me of everything I own. It looks like you forged documents, manipulated financial statements, and engaged in corporate fraud. It looks like I have enough evidence to bury both of you." Victoria turned to him, her voice sharp with fear. "You said he wouldn't fight back," she hissed. "You told me he wouldn't see it coming." Ben shook his head, flipping through the documents again, as if looking for some way out. This isn't possible. You didn't have time to put this together. You didn't know." I cut him off with a smirk. "I knew months ago, Ben. While you were busy plotting, I was dismantling everything you built. Did you really think I wouldn't notice my own wife sneaking around with my best friend? Did you think I wouldn't look into the missing money? I was watching you the whole time, waiting for you to make your move." He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Victoria was already standing, grabbing her purse, her hands trembling. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You think you won, but this isn't over." I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. "You're right, it's not over just yet." I hit dial. The call rang once before being answered. "You can come in now." The door opened again, and this time it wasn't Ben who stepped inside. It was my attorney, followed by a representative from the district attorney's office. Victoria froze. Ben took a step back. I smiled. Now it's over. Ben's face was a study in barely contained panic, his usual confidence draining away as the reality of the situation set in. Victoria, for all her practiced composure, looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting between me, the attorney, and the district attorney's representative. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, desperately trying to find a way out, but there was no escape. Not this time. Victoria straightened her shoulders, attempting to regain control. "Logan," she began, her voice deliberately softer, "we don't need to involve anyone else in this. We can talk, work something out privately." She glanced at the DA's representative, then back at me, forcing a smile that no longer held any power. "There's no need to ruin lives here." I let a moment of silence stretch between us, watching as she squirmed under my gaze. Finally, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "That's exactly what you were planning to do to me, Victoria. You didn't hesitate when you thought you'd won. You didn't stop to consider what you were destroying. And now that the tables have turned, you want mercy?" Her jaw tightened, and for the first time her mask cracked completely. The desperation flashed in her eyes, raw and ugly. "You set me up," she hissed. "This was all a trap." I tilted my head slightly. "A trap?" "No, Victoria. I just refused to let you walk all over me. You played your game. You just lost." Ben finally found his voice, though it was shakier than I'd ever heard it. "Logan, listen," he started, stepping forward as if that could somehow undo everything. Victoria and I, we might have made some mistakes, but it's not what you think. We can fix this. I mean, we've been friends for years, man. You don't want to go nuclear over a misunderstanding?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "A misunderstanding? Ben, you stole from me. You conspired with my wife to dismantle my life, my career, my reputation. You were willing to leave me with nothing while you walked away with everything I built. That's not a misunderstanding. That's premeditated destruction." I leaned back in my chair, taking in the absolute wreck of a man standing before me. "And you're about to find out what real destruction looks like." The DA's representative, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy suit, stepped forward, placing a thick folder onto my desk. "Mr. Hantley has provided us with extensive documentation regarding fraudulent financial activity tied to your firm," she said, addressing Ben directly. "There are multiple instances of asset misappropriation, embezzlement, and falsified reports. Given the scope of these offenses, I would advise you to cooperate fully. The alternative won't be pleasant." Ben turned to Victoria, as if expecting her to offer some way out, but she wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the documents in front of her face pale. "This isn't happening," she whispered, almost to herself. "This isn't how it was supposed to go." "That's the problem with greed," I said, standing up. "It makes you believe you're invincible, but you're not." Victoria's head snapped up, her desperation morphing into something else. Anger. "You think this makes you the better person?" she spat. "You think ruining me makes you a winner?" I met her glare with cold amusement. "I think it makes me the one still standing," I said simply. "Which is more than I can say for you." At that moment, 2 uniformed officers stepped into the office. Victoria's breath hitched. Ben took a step back, shaking his head. Wait, he stammered. "This is ridiculous. There's no need for this. We can negotiate. I can make this go away." The female officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Benjamin Cole, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Ben tried to protest, his words tripping over themselves in a mess of denial and panic. The moment the cuffs locked around his wrists, the last shred of his bravado collapsed. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, but I only watched as they led him away. Victoria stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. "You don't have anything on me," she finally said, her voice trembling but defiant. "This is all his doing. I didn't sign anything. I didn't move the money. You can't prove I was involved." The DA's representative sighed, shaking her head. "Mrs. Hantley, We have enough to charge you with conspiracy, attempted fraud, and money laundering. But if you're interested in a plea deal, now would be the time to start talking." I saw the moment it hit her. The realization that she wasn't getting out of this. Her breathing quickened, her hands twitched, as if she wanted to grab something, anything to hold on to. "Logan," she tried again, her voice breaking. "Please, I made mistakes, but this is too far." I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough for only her to hear. "You had no problem throwing me to the wolves, Victoria. You were ready to destroy me without hesitation. So don't stand here and beg me for mercy you never planned to give." The officer moved toward her, reaching for the second pair of handcuffs. For a moment, I thought she might fight, that she might throw one last desperate attempt to turn this around. But she didn't. She closed her eyes, inhaled sharply, and held out her wrists. The metal clicked shut, final and absolute. As they escorted her away, she glanced over her shoulder at me, her expression unreadable. Maybe she was searching for some sign of regret, some indication that I felt even the smallest ounce of guilt for what had just happened. But there was nothing left to feel. When the door finally closed behind them, the silence in my office felt heavier than ever. I exhaled slowly, running a hand over my face. It was over. The war they had started had ended before they ever had the chance to fire their final shot. My attorney picked up the remaining documents and gave me a small nod. "You did it," he said. "You came out ahead." I glanced at the empty chair where Victoria had been sitting, the stack of papers that detailed the empire they had tried to steal from me. "Yeah," I muttered. "I did." But for some reason, it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt like the inevitable conclusion of a game I never wanted to play. The news spread faster than I had expected. By the time I left my office that evening, it was already circulating in every major legal and financial circle. My phone buzzed constantly. Colleagues, journalists, even old friends I hadn't spoken to in years, all eager to get a statement. I ignored them. There was nothing left to say. The headlines spoke for themselves. Prominent divorce attorney exposes wife and business partner in fraud scandal. High-profile legal firm collapses amidst embezzlement allegations. Betrayal at the top. The shocking downfall of Victoria Hantley and Benjamin Cole. I didn't bother reading the full articles. I had written this ending myself, long before the world caught up. Victoria was released on bail by morning, but her carefully curated world had already started crumbling. The same high society circles that once welcomed her with open arms now treated her like a pariah. The donors who had funded her charitable foundation withdrew their support overnight, and within days, the organization collapsed under financial scrutiny. Every news outlet dissected her fall from grace, dragging out every detail of her betrayal, every financial misstep, every scandalous detail of her affair with Ben. She had spent years cultivating an image of power and influence, but now, she was nothing more than a disgraced socialite with nowhere to go. The house, the one she had been so certain she would keep, was legally untouchable to her now. Her legal team had tried, of course. They fought to argue her right to it, to the assets, to any semblance of the wealth she had once had access to, but there was nothing left for her to take. She had signed away her future the moment she decided to conspire against me. With no claim to my assets and no funds of her own, she was forced out within the week. The last I heard, she was staying in a mid-tier hotel on the other side of the city, far from the luxury she was accustomed to. I imagined her sitting in that room, scrolling through news articles about herself, watching as everything she had once controlled slipped through her fingers. Ben, however, had it far worse. He didn't have Victoria's connections, didn't have her ability to manipulate people into sympathy. His financial crimes had gone beyond our firm. There were layers of fraud, undisclosed offshore accounts, and deals that now placed him directly under federal investigation. His accounts were frozen, his assets seized, his reputation completely destroyed. Without a firm to back him, and with his legal license under review, he was left scrambling. He called me once, late at night, from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring until it stopped. Whatever he had to say no longer mattered. There was a strange kind of stillness in the days that followed. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. I didn't celebrate. There was no satisfaction in watching them suffer, no glee in seeing them beg for a second chance at the life they had so carelessly tried to rip away from me. There was only the quiet understanding that I had survived, that I had walked through the fire they set for me and emerged untouched. That was enough. I took what remained of the firm, the best clients, the most loyal employees, and started over under a new name. It wasn't about salvaging my reputation. That had already been restored the moment the truth came out. It was about reclaiming what was mine, about rebuilding on my own terms. The work kept me occupied, my days filled with meetings and courtrooms, legal battles that now seemed refreshingly simple compared to the war I had just fought in my personal life. At night, my home was quiet, but it was mine. No more forced conversations, no more careful performances, just silence, and for the first time, I welcomed it. Victoria tried to contact me once, a carefully worded email, polished and rehearsed, as if she still believed she could manipulate me into seeing her as something other than what she was. I know you're angry, but we don't have to be enemies. We shared a life once, Logan. I made mistakes, but we can be civil. Maybe even start over. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. There was no hatred left in me, no lingering bitterness. She was simply irrelevant. That was the real punishment. Not the lost money, not the destroyed reputation, not even the legal consequences she would soon face. The true cost of her betrayal was that she no longer mattered. On a quiet Saturday morning, I packed a bag and left the city for a while. No destination in mind, no itinerary, just a stretch of open road and the need to breathe in air that wasn't laced with the remnants of my past. The city had become a battlefield, every street and building a reminder of the war I had fought. I needed distance. I needed something new. As I drove down an empty highway, the weight that had sat heavy on my chest for months slowly began to lift. They had tried to take everything from me. My career, my reputation, my dignity. Instead, I walked away with the one thing they would never have again. My freedom,